Good morning, members of the Transportation Review Committee. This meeting is now called to order at 10:01 a.m. Before we begin, I would like to take a second to recognize the former chair of this committee, Chris Bridges. As many of you have heard, the former chair has left the city of Goodyear for a new career endeavor. We wish him luck in his new position and thank him for his leadership during his time as chair of this committee. I will be taking over as chair of this committee, and more information regarding filling the vice chair position will be released by MAG staff very soon. Please be on the lookout for that information. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will proceed with roll going alphabetically by organization. Ted Wolf, Apache Junction. Audra Merrick, ADOT. Raj Thowdam, City of Avondale.
Present.
Thank you. Scott Zipprich, Buckeye.
I'm in for Scott, but I don't know if he did an official proxy or not. This is Anissa Gerard.
Thank you, Anissa. I will have that copied down. CJ DiMaggio, Carefree. Tyler Thurman as proxy for Hal Marin, Cave Creek.
Here.
Thank you. Jason Crampton, Chandler.
I'm here virtually and I'll be there in person in just a couple minutes.
Thank you. Jorge Gastelum, El Mirage.
Present.
Thank you. Romeo Truly, FHWA.
Present.
Thank you. Christopher Salas, Florence. David Janover, Fountain Hills.
Here.
Thank you. Jason Hafner, Gilbert.
Here.
Parab Abbas is proxy for Shahid Abbas, Glendale.
Yep.
Thank you. Amanda Nelson, Guadalupe.
Here.
Thank you. Keith Jernaski, Litchfield Park. Scott Nodes, Maricopa. Chair Wilcox.
Here.
Thank you. RJ Zeter, Mesa.
Here.
Thank you. Shar Johnson, Paradise Valley. Brandy Kelso, Phoenix.
Here.
Thank you. Christopher Wanamaker, Pinal County Public Works. Julian Dressang as proxy for Muhammad Yusuf, Queen Creek.
Here.
Thank you. Mark Melanchenko, Scottsdale.
Here.
Thank you. Eric Bowles, Surprise.
Present.
Thank you. Shelley Seiler, Tempe.
Here.
Thank you. Chris Hamilton, Tolleson.
Here.
Thank you. Trevor Collin, Valley Metro.
Here.
Thank you. Herschel Workman, Wickenburg. And Grant Anderson, Youngtown.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you, Carrie. Our next item is called for the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, informational items, or items on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience unless the chair requests an exception to this limit. I have received no requests to speak for the call to the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not received any requests to speak.
Thank you. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, have we received any online written comments for the call to the audience?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for the call to the audience or any of the other agenda items.
Thank you. We'll move to item number 3, the MAG staff report. The MAG staff report will be presented by Pat Stone, MAG Deputy Transportation Director for Programming.
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of the Transportation Review Committee. Pleasure to be here to give the report today. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge two of our member agencies for receiving grants recently. First is the Town of Gilbert received a railroad crossing elimination grant for their at-grade crossing elimination study. This $2.5 million planning grant will allow the town to evaluate the safety and efficiency of 14 highway grade crossings in the town. A big safety improvement project for the town. Next slide, please. And then also the city of Phoenix was a recipient of a charging and fueling infrastructure, or CFI, grant. $15 million was made available to the city in their Electrify Phoenix application to allow the city to install charging infrastructure throughout the city. Of note, they do have 10 sites that will be portable solar powered charging sites. In addition, they're siting them at multi-family locations, supporting the city's goal. In addition, a couple other updates. RARF revenues for the month of December, 2.9% higher than the prior year. And kudos to our partners at ADOT that they were off on their forecast by less than $1,000. That is pretty staggering when you consider the funding they're dealing with. For the year to date, they are just about 1% over forecast for the year. HERF actuals were a bit lower, 3.4% lower for the month of December compared to the prior year. Year to date, they're running about 1.6% below forecast. Also, as I started with last month's programs managers report, just flagging some upcoming items for the committee's consideration. Month of February, we will be bringing the 2 new arterial competitive programs for arterial rehab and reconstruction and arterial widening. Those policies will be coming to this committee for consideration. Also in February, we'll have the ALCP policies and procedures being presented. Then moving on to the month of March, we will have the 2025 federal fund advancement for the arterial life cycle program. We'll have the locally preferred alternative, or LPA, for the Rio East Dobson light rail or streetcar extension. And then we will be providing a development update on the Prop 479 ALCP. And with that, Chair Wilcox, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Patrick. If members have any questions, please contact Patrick after the meeting. We'll proceed to item number 4, informational items, and there are no informational items on the agenda, so we'll move forward to agenda item number 5, approval of the consent agenda. Items 5A and 5B are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none, prior to approval of the consent agenda, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any item on the consent agenda. I have received no requests for the consent agenda. Staff, have we received any online written comments for the consent agenda?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for the consent agenda.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items 5A through 5B?
I'll move to approve.
We have a motion. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Parab. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. We need to see the faces of everyone to participate in the voice vote. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who did not turn on their camera. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote so that staff can count the people's names whose cameras are not on. Can I have a voice vote for those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their camera?
Thank you, Chair. Brandy Kelso, how do you vote? Julian Dresang, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion passes.
Thank you. We'll move to item number 6, Regional Competitive Programs, September 2024 Call for Projects, fiscal years 26, 27, 28, paving unpaved roads. This item is on the agenda for recommended approval and will be presented by Patrick Stone, MEG Deputy Transportation Director for Programming.
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of the Transportation Review Committee. Pleasure to be here to present the September 24 call for projects for paving unpaved roads. So whenever we talk about competitive programs, I always kind of like to come back to the nexus of policy, which guides all those things we do. Specific to these, it's the MAG Federal Fund Programming Guidelines and Procedures, last approved by MAG Regional Council in June of 2015. And really, these documents provide the guidance related to regional competitive programs, explains the process and how we conduct that process. And specific to this committee today, Section 400.4 outlines the responsibility of the Transportation Review Committee in noting that they are responsible for the initial project selection. So when we talk about paving unpaved roads, we actually have some additional documentation because we do use federal Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, or CMAQ, funding for these. So the paving unpaved roads is actually a committed measure in the 1999 Serious Area Particulate Plan for PM10, also included in our 2012 5% plan for PM10. And the Regional Transportation Plan, or the Momentum 25 plan, it does assume there's an annual paving of at least 10 miles of unpaved roads to reduce fugitive dust. So to this specific call for project cycle, memo was distributed to Management Committee and the various technical committees on September 16th, outlining the call and the call process. Requests were due on October 17th of last year. In total, 12 applications were received with just over $32 million in regional funding requested. When we did send out the memo, we noted there was only $15 million in funding. And the way the funding is, and you'll see it on a subsequent slide, the way the funding is actually allocated for paving unpaved roads, we have a certain percentage that is in the PM10 non-attainment area, and then an amount for the PM2.5 non-attainment area. So the chart on the screen here actually shows the funding broken down by fiscal year between 26, 27, 28, and then again, the breakdown between the two categories of funding, which is PM10 and PM2.5. Note for the committee, no applications were received for projects within the PM2.5 non-attainment area. So today's focus is really just on the PM10 and the 12.8 million. On the screen, you can see the first of the project rankings. The way these are developed, we do them by fiscal year. So we have funding for 26. We rank projects and score them for 26, and then for 27 and 28. So the first project requested and recommended for funding is for the town of Cave Creek. We were recommending fully funding their project. Second, we have a request for the city of Phoenix for their project with a partial funding recommendation of 79% of the funding. So that is for fiscal year 26. Moving forward, fiscal 27, 4 applications were received. Based on funding available, the recommendation is to fully fund the city of Phoenix application at just over 4.2 million. And that would be all of the projects we'd funded 27, advancing one last year, fiscal year 2028. The recommendation here, because of the size of the top ranked project, would be to partially fund the city of Phoenix's request in fiscal year 2028, representing just about 70% of the total project cost. We did reach out to the city of Phoenix. They did confirm they would be receptive to receiving partial funding. That, Chair Wilcox, members of the Transportation Review Committee, pleasure to present this item. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Do any members have any questions or comments?
Anderson, Youngtown, I have a question. It appears that Phoenix is getting almost all of the funding, certainly in the latter years. But there's a couple, 3 small communities like Buckeye that receive nothing. What do we do with the small communities that, why were they not selected to receive at least some funds, as their economics is a lot smaller than Phoenix?
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of the TRC. Mr. Anderson, really what we see here is a result of a data-driven process that's really managed by our environmental division. But the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee, or AQTAC, the way this is funded and awarded, because this is CMAQ funding, there has to be an emissions reduction benefit calculated. So as you looked at the scoring on the prior slides, what you're really, there we go, thank you. But looking at fiscal year 2028, if you focus in the column It's kind of the one that's on the screen highlighted in gray. Apologies, it's orange here. But you can see the emissions reduction benefits calculated dollars per metric ton. So it's really a focus or a function of two things. What is the cost of the project and what are the benefits of the project? So it really is a cost benefit driven analysis. And hence that's why the recommendation is made the way the recommendation is.
I assume that was a lot of it, but what drives that equation? Is it traffic? Is it location? Or is it wind? Whereas if it was wind, I would believe that Buckeye would get a serious increase in the benefit. So what drives the equation?
Chair Wilcox, members of TRC, Mr. Anderson. Yeah, I would have to get back to the committee on the calculations. I have seen a part of it. We do have the CMAQ methodologies. It's available on the website, the 2021 CMAQ methodologies. It does explain the science behind it and the math. I will acknowledge they are very difficult calculations, but a part of it really is based on the volume of traffic on the roadway, proximity to a PM10 monitor, other numerous factors. But yeah, we can certainly get back to the committee with what drives those calculations.
I would love to hear that. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Patrick, is this program similar to like street sweepers or design assistants where those that don't get any funding could apply for funding through the closeout, or is this more like the bike ped program where if you don't get funding, you're not getting funding?
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of TRC, Mr. Crampton. It's the latter. And the question of would these projects be eligible for closeout? The reason why street sweepers and design assistants are actually eligible for closeout is we award the projects in the year that we're going to program. So we're currently in fiscal year 2025. Those applications are for fiscal year 2025. So we can use the funding. Because we're programming out years, we can't commit future federal funding towards closeout when we don't know if we would even have funding available. So yeah, unfortunately, those that are funded are funded. That being said, when we do the next call for projects, this is an ongoing program. This isn't the last bite of the apple. Those agencies could submit additional applications. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Prior to voting, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment. I have received no request for this agenda item. Staff, have we received any online written comments for this agenda item?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any online written comments for this item.
Thank you. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the prioritized listing of fiscal years 26, 2027, and 2028 paving unpaved road projects and proposed funding scenario for the associated amendments? Can we have a motion, please?
This is Dave Joniver. I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Dave. And can I have a second, please?
Chair, this is Jason Hafner. So moved.
Thank you. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until the roll call vote is complete. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room online? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually who did not turn on the cameras?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone had their cameras on and the motion passes.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to item number 7, Arterial Life Cycle Program Status Report, July through September 2024. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Carrie Kassler, MEG Transportation Planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, members of TRC. Today I'll be providing an update or a report on the status report of the Arterial Life Cycle Program for July through December of 2024. So the Arterial Life Cycle Program, or the ALCP, is supported by Prop 400 and provides regional funding for various arterial projects. The ALCP policies and procedures require a status report to be produced twice a year, and this report will be the first for fiscal year 2025. This report includes revenue forecasts, revisions to project schedules and costs, and adjustments to programmed reimbursements. The ALCP is funded by two sources, the first being the funding allocated from the half-cent sales tax to the ALCP under Prop 400, also known as the Regional Area Road Fund, or RARF. Next is federal funding, which is allocated to the MAG region and then allocated to the ALCP specifically. The difference between the actuals and the estimate revenues had a difference of about 0.03%, which is about what we would expect. Very minimal as we near the close of the ALCP during under Prop 400, excuse me. There's not much fluctuation between the actuals and the estimates, so this is about what we would see or expect to see. There are 51 projects scheduled for work and or reimbursement in fiscal year 2025. Of those 51 projects, 15 are in development, 31 are in construction, and 5 projects are for reimbursements only. The total amounts for both the RARF reimbursements and the federal obligations in this fiscal year can be shown here, being $276.8 million of RARF reimbursements and $41.3 million in federal obligations. There are 16 projects that are planned to be open to traffic during this fiscal year. Within the report that is provided in the agenda packet, there are several tables that provide more specific and detailed information on each project. Table 3 has all 51 projects that are programmed for work or reimbursement in fiscal year 25. And then tables 4.1 and 4.2 break those out into projects that are funded by regional funds or RARF and then federally funded projects. Finally, for each status report, we like to highlight a project from one of our member agencies. This report, we are highlighting a project from the city of Scottsdale on Pima Road from Pinnacle Peak Road to Happy Valley Road. This project includes several improvements such as bike lanes, sidewalks, drainage improvements, regional drainage channels, and a sound wall. Construction for these improvements were completed in fall of 2024, and you can see some photos provided by the city on the screen. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. Really nothing to see here, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Carrie. Do any members have any questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move to item number 8, Regional Construction Cost Trends Overview. This will be presented by Arminta Syed, Transportation Policy and Initiatives Program Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of Transportation Review Committee. We recently completed an analysis of historical construction cost trends focusing on freeway and highway projects, and I'm here today to provide an overview of those findings. First, I'll start off by providing some context on our analysis, as well as talking about some trends we observed that have impacted the market nationwide. Then I'll discuss some more localized trends that have impacted the regional construction industry. Next, I'll quantify or illustrate the impact of those trends using some actual project examples. And then I'll wrap up today by briefly discussing what you can expect looking ahead. So MAG, in coordination with ADOT, oversees the Regional Freeway Program or the Freeway Lifecycle Program. As part of managing this program, we monitor construction costs and make sure that our project cost estimates are reflecting the latest market conditions. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, those costs have fluctuated significantly. And so to better understand the trends that are driving those fluctuations, we conducted this analysis. And so really when you're looking at construction costs, it's the sum of 4 different input categories that make up a contract bid that contractors are submitting for construction projects. And so this includes material, equipment, labor, and then overhead and profit margin as well. And so this analysis focused on key trends that drove the prices of those first 3 inputs. Turning over to the key trends that we saw impacting the national market, starting back in 2019, before the pandemic, the market was considered to be relatively stable. Prices were increasing, activity was going up, but they were increasing at a moderate rate, and so it was considered to be a stable market. Then in 2020, the pandemic hit, there was a global shutdown, activity paused across all sectors, and there was a disruption in the global supply chain. And so demand and supply both went down. Then in 2021, we saw the impact of some federal programs that went into place in an effort to help the economy recover from the pandemic. Um, Programs that made federal funding available for infrastructure projects or kept interest rates at historically low levels. And this really started to drive construction or demand for construction activity back up. On the flip side, the supply chain for construction had not really fully recovered from the pandemic or the disruptions it had caused. And that gap between supply and demand started to cause the prices, construction input prices, to increase. And that increase was further compounded by some of the inflationary increases and other global events that were occurring at the time. Then in 2023, we started to see the effect of other federal legislation that was signed in earlier years. You can really see this particularly with construction demand for manufacturing construction. When you look at this chart here, what it's comparing is the total manufacturing construction starts in comparison to the total construction starts. And so that peak in 2023 reflects the manufacturing construction starts. And that's really a reflection of the CHIPS Act, which incentivized manufacturing construction. And then still again, on the flip side, the supply chain still had not fully recovered. And that same legislation, as well as others, expanded requirements as well as added incentives that added further pressures to the supply chain and how materials and other inputs were sourced. And then finally, you get to 2024, where we've seen some of those prices start to stabilize. You're no longer seeing those big jumps that we had seen in earlier years. But because of that, the demand continues to be strong. Those prices remain much higher than they were pre-pandemic. And again, you can see that here when you look at this chart and you look at the trend line and you see it start to flatten out, especially from 2024 here on out. And sorry, I forgot to explain. This is the producer price index for construction inputs nationwide. Moving on now to discuss impacts to the regional construction market. Everything that's been happening on the nationwide scale has also been impacting, of course, the regional construction market. But the regional construction market has felt that impact at a heightened level. And that's really because of all of the concentration of construction activity that's been happening in our region. And you can really see the significance of that when you look at this chart that compares the construction spending index first in the country, then in the state, then in the region. And since 2019, the region has outpaced the state, which has outpaced the nation. Really, what's driving the majority of this activity are two sectors. First, in line with that manufacturing trend that we observed, that I discussed a few slides ago, talking about the national market trends. A lot of that manufacturing investment has occurred here in our region. And in fact, between 2020 to 2023, Phoenix was ranked the top growth market for manufacturing construction. Also during this period, the region saw a substantial amount of population growth. It was driven by net migration, and that drove a lot of demand for residential construction. And so what this did, all of this construction activity, was put a strain on local resources, materials, and equipment to produce and transport those materials, things like aggregates, asphalt, and cement. And these are materials commonly used across all types of construction. And again, these just drove up the prices of those materials. Take, for example, the price of aggregates, which are typically sourced locally across the country. Since 2019, Arizona has seen the 8th largest increase in the price of aggregate. Moving on now to talk about another shared resource, labor. The shortage of construction labor has been a top concern here in our region. Since 2019, the construction unemployment rate has been, for the most part, lower than the national average, and you can see that here. And by the end of fiscal year 2024, the construction unemployment rate in the state actually hit the second lowest rate since 2007, signalizing a very tight labor market, partially due to an aging workforce and as well as the competition and the amount of resources required by those big manufacturing projects. There's a significant amount of vacancies expected by the end of fiscal 2026. And so what this did is it drove up the cost of labor. And you can see this when you compare the average wage increase nationwide in comparison to the increase in the region. And so ultimately, circling back to what I mentioned when I first started discussing market trends in the region, we've seen a heightened impact, and you can see that when you compare the National Highway Construction Index developed by the Federal Highway Administration compared to ADOT's Construction Cost Index. And then here is a further breakdown of those cost increases that we've seen here in the state, broken down by major bid category. Now I'll illustrate the impact of those trends using actual freeway project cost examples. I'll illustrate using 3 projects, regional FLCP projects that went to bid back in fiscal year 2021. Starting first with a widening project on Loop 303 between Happy Valley Road to Lake Pleasant Parkway. In fiscal year 2021, the cost of this project was roughly $17.9 million. If this project were to be constructed in fiscal year 2024, the cost would be $35.8 million. That is almost an increase of 100%. And the main drivers driving that increase are concrete, earthwork, and structures. Moving on to another example using an interchange on Loop 202 at Lindsay Road. In fiscal year 2021, the cost to construct this interchange was roughly $18.2 million. If this interchange were to go to bid in fiscal year 2024, it would cost roughly $43 million, an increase of about 136%, again, driven primarily by those 3 same categories. And then the last example, a new interim freeway, State Route 24 between Ellsworth Road to Ironwood Drive. When it went to bid in fiscal 21, it cost roughly $66.5 million. In 2024, it would be $156.7 million, an increase of about 135%, again, driven by concrete, earthwork, and drainage. And then particularly of note, earthwork has, of course, seen a significant cost increase, but it is particularly sensitive for new freeway project types because of the quantity of earthwork required for these types of projects as well. So looking ahead, we can expect a lot of these same trends to continue, at least for the near term. Demand will continue to be strong, especially when you consider what's in the pipeline right now. And we can also expect a lot of the pressures and the weaknesses of the regional supply chain to continue as well. The good news is that as we've experienced a lot of these cost increases, we've also had a lot of management tools and processes in place that have allowed us to navigate the Prop 400 FLCP. Things like biannual cost updates, year of expenditure cash flow analysis, and established processes to come in front of committees like this to discuss what we're seeing on a regular basis. And so to summarize my presentation today, costs have significantly gone up since the onset of the pandemic. They will likely remain high in the near term. We have management tools in place that have allowed us to successfully navigate the Prop 400 freeway program as those costs have gone up during this period, and that will allow us to continue navigating the program in the future. Where we're really going to see the impact of these cost increases is with the Prop 479 freeway program. Those cost updates are currently underway, and we expect to give an update overview of that program starting next month. The good news when it comes to the Prop 479 freeway program is that the revenue forecasts have also increased, and so that will be discussed as part of the next presentation. And so that concludes my presentation today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Arminta. This item was on the agenda for information and discussion. Do any members have any questions or comments?
Yeah, not a question, but just want to thank you, Arminta, for the great presentation. I saw it at Management Committee, did a great job there. And then here again, really great information. We've certainly felt these cost increases and are starting to definitely see it level off where now bids are coming in below engineer estimates. Once in a while, we've raised our engineer estimates so high that I think they had to, but that's good to see this leveling off. But that's a great story, so appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments from the members? Thank you, Arminta. Moving on to agenda item number 9, Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan Revenue Projections Update. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Patrick Stone, MAG Deputy Transportation Director for Programming.
Thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of the Transportation Review Committee. I get to tell the other side of the equation, which is what we've seen on the revenue side, the corollary to Arminta's previous presentation. So when we talk about the RSTIP, we need to kind of understand what the RSTIP is, the Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, approved by MAG Regional Council unanimously back in June of 2021, again updated in September of 2023 to reflect changes with Senate Bill 1102, really guides transportation investments in the region through 2045. The RSTIP did serve as the basis of the extension of Prop 400 through Prop 479. And key component statute does require everything contained within the RSTIP be fiscally balanced. For those who may have seen this slide before, this is kind of an anchor slide we use. It really talks about the investments within the RSTIP. We focused on the top of the slide, which kind of outlines where we're spending those dollars. Spent some previous meetings talking about the programmatic investments in the lower left-hand corner, but today we're really going to focus on the lower right-hand corner and really the funding in the RSTIP. So currently the RSTIP as it sits has an anchor balance, $28.2 billion. You can see how it's made up based on the slide. So the RSTIP in and of itself includes all revenue sources that were available to the region at the time of the plan's development. These included dedicated half-cent sales tax for transportation, as first begun under Prop 300, continued through Prop 400, and now with successful passage last November of Prop 479, really it's a 40-year regional commitment to funding infrastructure improvements in the region. You have the Highway User Revenue Fund, or HURF, reflects those allocations of state highway funds that we get to the region. We have federal highway funding made available to the region. This actually comes in two ways. So we have the funding that's allocated through ADOT as part of the Freeway Lifecycle Program, excuse me. Then we also have those funds that are directly allocated to the region. And then finally, we do have formula funds made available from the Federal Transit Administration. So that $28.2 billion, that's our starting point. What was going on when we came up with the $28.2 billion? They were done in 2020. The numbers were actually developed during 2020, even though the plan was approved in June of 21. Their pandemic was going on. The revenue and the fiscal impacts you heard on the construction side as well, everything was still being assessed during that time. No one knew what the impacts would be. Surface transportation, we were still under the FAST Act. It expired in September of 2020, had been extended for a year. We did not know where surface transportation reauthorization would go. And then one thing, if you think about the RSTIP and the investment plan, and we've talked about projects, we talk about them in phases. So we say phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Those were really 5-year windows of programming. And because of that, we actually did those projects in constant dollars because of the 5-year phasing. Result, we took a very conservative approach to programming revenues in the RSTIP. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of do a side-by-side comparison, starting with that forecast that made up the $28.2 billion. So going back, you can see the allocation across funding categories. The largest funding source, as always, the half-cent sales tax for transportation, gives us the $28.2 billion. What we then did was we said, okay, now that we can start sequencing projects and we're moving forward, take those forecasts back from 2020, but bring them up into year of expenditure, YOE, or current dollars. Applying that consideration, we move up $11.5 billion to just shy of $40 billion. In the interim, we now have another 4 years of data. So we have 4 years of RARF data, 4 years of federal data. We have the IIJA. So what we then have done is we've updated those forecasts reflecting current estimates. And again, you see a market increase. We move up just shy of 50 billion at 48.1 billion. It put it in percentage terms, the final number, the 48 billion, 21% over the YOE of the 2020 estimates, 70% higher than our base RSTIP number. Largest growth category, not really a shock. It was in the half-cent sales tax. That's where we really saw some very conservative projections. So the numbers went up pretty high. Maybe not surprising to some folks in the room. HERF was the only category that actually went down. Reflects really the diminishing purchasing power of the gas tax. Federal revenues increased, not as much as others, but that was really the reflection of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. And one interesting concept, the revenue projections, they grew the most in the short term. And if you really think about RARF, we didn't really change the year-over-year change. We said, oh, it's growing at a certain percentage. The change was about 0.5%. That's not very much. But the base allocation was where the biggest jump occurred. So where do we go from here? Next steps? Because we did account for inflation in the RSTIP, the challenge really becomes, and as Arminta alluded to in the prior presentation, construction's far outstripped that. The increases in the construction market beyond anything we could have imagined. They will be partially offset, not fully, but partially offset by the higher revenue projections. So as part of that, and as alluded to, we'll start talking about the impacts in the life cycle programs over the balance of calendar year 2025. We do not anticipate the impacts being as the same on the arterial and the transit life cycle programs, mainly because of how they're focused. The region has a funding commitment to those programs, but it's sort of more of a fixed funding commitment, and the cost sharing is already predefined. Impacts to the freeway program, as we said, those will begin next month at Policy Committee in February. Should be very interesting conversations. That, Chair Wilcox, members of the TRC, concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Do any members have any questions or comments of Patrick? Yes, James.
Hi, Mr. Chair. I'll go again. Patrick, I ask you this frequently, so you probably anticipate what I'm going to ask about. So on the last slide, you covered it briefly, the ALCP and TLCP revenues, and we're going to be working on those over the calendar year. Can you provide a little more details when we might see actual numbers in some of those tables with the TLCP and ALCP, so we can start to kind of forecast that within our own budget and planning processes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wilcox, members of the TRC, Mr. Crampton. I think we'll have some of those conversations. It really depends on the program. The arterial life cycle program, as I alluded to in my program manager remarks, we look to bring the policies before the committees this spring. We need the policies in place. It's kind of like that. That's the hallmark of that. Once we have that, then we can start talking about updated revenue estimates, updated cost estimates, and then really start figuring out what that means programmatically as far as how we allocate those dollars, the timing of that. I think we'll see that on the transit side as well. A lot of work still to be done to develop the TLCP. What we're working on now will be taking these rough numbers and then taking them down the next level into those specific programs. More to come on that.
Do any members have any additional questions or comments for Patrick? Hearing none, we'll move to item number 10, request for future agenda. Are there any requests from the membership for an item on a future agenda? Hearing none, the next agenda item is comments from the committee. Are there any comments or announcements from the membership to be shared with the group? Hearing none, the next meeting of the Transportation Review Committee will be on Thursday, February 27th, 2025 at 10 a.m. With no further business, today's meeting is adjourned at 10:47 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have a good day.